morning, everyone. Welcome to the House Democratic Caucus. Today is February 14th, 2023. Happy birthday to those of you who celebrate today, Alice, John. And happy Valentine's Day to all of you. I have a few announcements, and then we have actually quite a, maybe 4 or 5 bill reports that we're going to be doing. So stay in your seats. It's going to be fun. So I'll go right to the announcements first. Quickly, floor is going to be the same this week and next week, 10, 3, 3, and 9:30. But do keep a listen, because as we do every year, we're going to be moving floor times, but depending on, you know, how many bills are coming to the floor in any given day. So just keep an eye out. We'll keep talking about it here, but this week and next week should remain the same. There's going to be a joint assembly on Thursday. I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to remind everybody again. It's at 10:30, and it's to elect a sergeant at arms and the UVM trustees. This is likely going to go into, or at least up to, the lunch hour, so be prepared for that on Thursday. Crossover dates, I'm going to remind you of those again. March 17th is policy crossover, and March 24th for money crossover. Just keep that in mind. But I also wanted to mention getting your bills finalized. The date is February 21st, but remember that February 21st date doesn't apply to short form bills. They can be done anytime. Oh, and also about getting your bills in. This was, you know, just help out the folks who work with us on all these bills, our staff. Monday is a holiday. Remember that Monday's a holiday, so please get those bills in as early as possible. Okay, and the final announcement I have is there's going to be a joint hearing on housing on Thursday, 2/16. It's at 5 p.m. and it's in the pavilion, this building, in room 267. So just wanted to let you know that's at 5 o'clock on Thursday. All right, that was the announcements that I had. I don't see any others. I'm going to go right into bills, and I'm going to call on Lori first. Lori and her committee members. Looks like Alyssa's coming with her.
Hi, everyone. So we have 2 things to talk about today. The first, anyone hear me? We voted, today we voted to send 3 bills to House Ways and Means. Those bills were voted out of our committee on Friday on a 10-0 vote. All 3 of them are interstate compacts. And so for those who don't know what a compact is, in Vermont, you are licensed to practice in Vermont. If you join a compact, you may also apply without all of the licensing requirements of that other state to practice in another state. So for instance, let's say you're a mental health counselor in Vermont and you have a Vermont license and you are providing treatment to a high school student, and then they decide to move to Maine for college. Currently today, the provider would either need to go through the Maine license requirements to continue that treatment, or the college student would need to find another provider. Joining a compact means that that provider can continue that treatment with that person when they're in Maine. So that's a pretty simple explanation. But there are 3 compacts we passed. One is H62, which is for mental health counselors. One is H77, which is for physical therapists. And one is for H86, which is audiology and speech language pathology. So a compact increases portability for a provider. It increases access for the person needing treatment. We also heard from the military in that it supports military spouses. They move around a lot, and if they have a license as a mental health counselor, this will help them be able to practice pretty quickly in our state if they have a license in one of the compact states that are included. And then it also ensures the protection of our consumers, in that it allows each state to maintain the authority to regulate the professions as we do in Vermont. So they're going to Ways and Means. They did a pass through of government operations, and we will be taking up another compact, a psych pack compact as well. Any, we doing questions? Any questions on compacts?
We need to give you a microphone because people can't hear us who are watching on YouTube.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, I think it's a great idea. I'm wondering, are these compacts generally New England, or are they larger? Are they regional? Are they selective?
So any state can choose to join a compact. So the Mental Health Counseling Compact right now has 15 states, although it's not active yet, but it will be soon. They're just finishing the final rules. I believe the physical therapists have about 33 states. Don't hold me to that. And that is active. And then I honestly forget about the last one, how many, but so you can choose to join. You're welcome.
Kurt Taylor, Colchester. Representative Houghton, what happens if two states have different qualifications for their certification?
So the compact is agreed to by the body that creates the compact. And as a state, we cannot change the language of a compact. So we have to agree, everyone has to have the same. But for instance, the audiology and speech language pathology, the compact requires you to be a doctorate in audiology, but we at the state level only require a master's. So people can still practice with a master's. And then if they want to join the compact, it would be with a doctorate.
So the individual joins the compact, not just the state in general.
So the state has to join the compact, and then the individual can apply to the compact commission for a privilege to practice in the compact states. And they would say, I want to join Maine, Ohio, and New Jersey. And they would pay a fee probably to those states, and then they could receive a license to practice in those states.
Ah, very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So feel free to find anyone in the committee if questions come up. So now we're going to move to what we're doing over the next couple of weeks, what we started last week in committee. So we are taking on suicide prevention work, and the lens of which we're doing this work is through a public health lens. And just to make sure we all start from the same base knowledge, public health is the science of protecting and improving the health of entire populations and their communities. I'm going to provide some statistics first that we heard from testimony last week. People who are at risk of suicide often don't seek help. Only 37% of Vermonters who died by suicide were engaged in mental health treatment at the time of their death. The populations that are most at risk of dying by suicide, males, rural Vermonters, Vermonters with disabilities, veterans, and the LGBTQ+ communities. In 2012, we had 86 suicides in the state of Vermont, death by suicide. 56 of those were by firearms. In 2020, we had 117 deaths by suicide, 2020, and 76 by firearms. In 2021, we had 142 deaths by suicide and 76 by firearms. Our Vermont rate of suicide is almost 50% higher than the US, and for veterans, it is even higher. Males more predominantly die by suicide. Females are self-harm by poisoning. In the state of Vermont, 52% of deaths by suicide are firearms. I'm sorry, 52% of suicide attempts or deaths are firearms, and 48% are poisoning. Nearly all firearm deaths in Vermont are suicide. 89% of firearm deaths are by suicide, 8% are by homicides. We also heard from families, a pediatric doctor from UVMMC and another researcher from UVMMC. And the themes we heard that often these are impulsive acts. And if someone would have just been given some time, they may not have completed the act. Postvention services are really lacking. Texas and New Hampshire provide information and support groups to families. We have one support group in Chittenden County in Vermont, and it has a wait list. We also heard that our schools, our staff, and our students really need help. So what we've done to date in the committee, and this was passed the last year, I believe last biennium, we created a director of suicide prevention, and that person has been hired and testified last week. We have fully supported the expansion of 988, which is the National Suicide Hotline. And we hope to expand that funding with this budget. And the state has received 2 federal grants that Department of Mental Health and Vermont Department of Health are working together on. But we still need to help Vermonters. There are too many people dying by suicide. So our committee will be looking at postvention supports, education, and the lethality and the methods of suicide. So we will continue taking testimony today from some national players.
Researchers at Harvard, researcher from Duke, and Rand will be coming in today
to talk about the research they've done, specifically around suicide and lethal means. And then we will also be taking subsequent, testimony from advocate groups. And then we will also eventually be taking up a bill to deal more with the postvention and the education supports that we need. So we just wanted to give an update on what we're doing in the House Healthcare Committee. It's been hard testimony. We all sit in these seats and we do hard work, and our committee felt that last week. Any questions?
Hi, thank you. Are you doing, is there anything in your bill about locking up firearms and or raising the age when someone can purchase a gun?
So today in committee, we will be voting to take a short form bill off the wall, H230, which Alyssa wrote, and it's the lethality of
looking at ways to reduce suicide by access of lethal means.
So we'll be turning that into a long form bill and a committee bill, and we'll see what comes out of it from there. Any other questions?
I just appreciate your working on this. And I wanted to share an insight I gleaned a couple of years ago from studying suicide prevention that I think is probably you have found and might be helpful for everyone to understand that there is a stigma around suicide of prevention as a lost effort because someone would have done it anyway. And the data shows from decades of research, the data shows that if you take away access, people avoid that and get treatment and lives are saved. So I wanted to share that.
Tristan, thank you very much. That is such a good point. And we heard that testimony with the researchers from UVMMC. They, so people who have attempted suicide and make it to the hospital and survive, they work with those individuals and follow them, for decades. And the comment was made that in interviews, no one says, I wanted to die. They said, I just was feeling a lot of pain. Yeah. And often do not attempt again. So excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up.
90% of people who attempt suicide go on to live and do not die by suicide. So one suicide attempt, 90% of people never attempt again.
Thank you. I was wondering if you had any numbers on how many of those are veterans? And if you have it broken down by age groups, like which ones are more accessible? Thank you.
So we have all of that information and it's on our website. Testimony that will provide that information was last Thursday, and I have it with me. I'm also happy to talk to people offline. But we do have all of that data.
Hey, folks, did you want to speak to? Did you have your hand up? Well, before we bring you the microphone, when you get the microphone to ask your question, please introduce yourself for everyone first and then ask your question or make your comment. Thanks.
Yes, Chip Troiano from Standard. And I'm just wondering if the VA is involved in this at all concerning the veteran suicide rate.
So I've reached out to several people, as has advocates who are helping me contact people to the Veterans Administration to see if we can get someone in to testify. Thank you.
So as I always say with any of these bills or issues, please reach out to any member, bill reporters, member of the committee, people who are reporting on it from up here. Please make sure that you go to them and get your questions answered ahead of time. Okay, we're going to move on to another topic. I don't know what, I think it's two of you. Yeah, Representative McCarthy and Representative Byrong have two different topics.
Thank you, Representative Long. So I've asked Representative Byrong to join me for a couple of updates from House GovOps and Military Affairs. So the first thing I wanted to update folks on is that I know many of us have heard from retired teachers about cost of living adjustments for this year. And we have been working with the Speaker's office, senators, and the Treasurer's office to understand and hopefully come up with a consensus solution. So to just give briefly the context, if you're unfamiliar with this issue, the last time anyone looked at the cost of living adjustment formula in statute was 2016. And at that time, the focus was really on making sure that teachers got an increase in their retirement payments, even in years where there was some deflation, and that they didn't have to keep coming back to the legislature each year to negotiate some cost of living adjustment. So a formula, which is pretty complex to read, in Act 114 of 2016 spelled out how this would work. And it did a good job of making sure there was always at least a small increase in teachers' retirement checks. This year, this past year, the calculation went over a maximum threshold. And so the COLA was capped at 2.5%. And so there's been some call for it to be just a straight 50% of CPI. The statutory formula doesn't read that way. And so the question is, how do we reconcile the desire that retired teachers have to, get the increase that is proportional to the inflation last year? And also, how do we make sure that we aren't putting more pressure long-term on the unfunded liability by adjusting the base upward that every percentage increase going forward is calculated on? We believe that we have a couple of ideas on the table that might square those circles and do both of those things, offer teachers more payment this year without rebasing everything moving forward. And so the Senate folks that are in the room, the Treasurer's office, Speaker's been working on this with me and other relevant legislative chairs to come up with a consensus idea. I would say stay tuned. In the next couple of days, I think we'll be ready to share the exact outlines of a proposal on that. So appreciate everybody's patience while we kind of dug into what would the consequences be of different solutions to this issue. So that's COLAs. Stay tuned is the bottom line message there. And we are working on it. So next, I want to bring Representative Byrong up with me to talk about H127. So our committee has been working on a number of bills but we are getting to the point where I think in the next few days, we'll be voting out the sports wagering bill, H127. So last session in 2022, there was established a sports betting study committee that Representative Byron was on, along with members of the administration, Attorney General's office, other stakeholders. They met in the fall, and they made several recommendations. The bill as it was introduced captured those recommendations, and we have been diving into the details of several aspects. So you all may have read about sports wagering nationally. You probably saw in the Super Bowl that companies like FanDuel that operate sports books in, I think, over 30 other states at this point.
Give or take, the numbers moving rapidly.
So sports wagering online is here with us. I think all of us probably know multiple people who either go over the border to play sports bets or are betting illegally online today through offshore illegal betting websites. The proliferation of these sites has rocketed after a Supreme Court decision a few years ago, and many states moved quickly to legalize some level of sports wagering in their states. I am not the biggest fan of us endorsing or condoning or promoting gambling. That is not why I and Representative Byron are working on this bill. I have approached this, and I think many of those of us on the House Gov Ops and Military Affairs Committee, as a way to look at ways that we can add consumer protection to this existing market, that we can have some resources to help folks who have problem gambling issues and are suffering, and their families and people around them are suffering from problem gambling, and that we protect Vermonters from bad actors, which are rampant in this particular and growing industry. That we want to have truth in advertising. We want to make sure that advertising is not directed at youth, and that we set some guardrails that are reasonable in a regulated market. So this bill seeks to do those things in a variety of ways, and establish responsible gaming requirements. I think one of the key things to know is that this would establish us not as a licensed market state, but as a control state, where we have a small number of operators that are licensed by the state. The Department of Liquor and Lottery would be the agency that's in charge of regulating those license holders who would operate. It's also important to note that this is only about mobile, online, ID verified mobile gaming. So there wouldn't be kiosks, there would not be casinos, there would not be any of the physical locations that some other states have when it comes to gambling. This would only be a regulated market for online mobile sports betting through apps that have very specific responsible gaming requirements in the bill. So I think I've covered most of the highlights. Anything else I missed there, Representative Byron, or anything you want to add?
The one piece I want to add on the prevention and treatment piece is we currently do have a budget for responsible gaming and treatment that is operated through the Liquor and Lottery, geared towards lotto play, and it is extremely underutilized by the public. We basically just farm it out as a subcontract to Howard Center. And so one of the goals within this is to actually pull that into this responsible gaming program to make it more cohesive and more functional throughout both aspects, both lottery and what we would potentially do here with online wagering. So we're trying to fix a current problem within this structure as well.
Thanks, that's a great point.
Questions or comments?
Hi, Karen Dolan, Essex Junction. So I'm going back to the retired teacher COLA piece. So I appreciate the update on that. Heard from a number of community members on the topic. So I know they're going to be looking forward to the big reveal in a couple of days. And I'm just curious if you can share again who the stakeholders are that are part of this process, because I know they'll be curious about that too.
Yeah, so the call to address the difference between a straight 50% CPI calculation and what's in the statutory formula really came from retired teachers and the NEA. And the folks who are working at trying to present those folks who are representing teachers in our communities are members of the relevant chairs in the House and the Senate and the Treasurer's office. And I think that we're very, very close to having a consensus position that we can present to the NEA and to retired teachers. The thing to note is that this year, the average retiree with a 2.5% increase, the average retiree in the teacher system, the VSTER system, is getting a little over $20,000. So if you think about what a 2.5% increase is, we're talking about, somewhere in the $450 to $500 range is sort of the annual increase. And so doing an extra 1.5%, which is what the ask is, would be, somewhere around $200 to $250 a year for the average retiree. So we're talking about like $20 a month. What that translates to in 1 year is somewhere between $3 and $4 million. What it translates to, if we rebase everything and then every future calculation is on that, is $40+ million of additional unfunded liability. And we just did so much work over the last 2 years to try to stabilize the system that is still extremely underfunded. So we're trying to balance the very real, retirement concerns and cost of living concerns with the desire of not putting any more undue pressure on an already unstable system.
Michelle Boslin from Westminster. I have 2 questions about the sports gambling. First of all, what would be the anticipated revenue that would come into the state for that? And then the second thing would be, do we have a particularly targeted focus that we would be using those funds for?
So Representative Byron talked about there being a set aside responsible gaming fund that's in the bill, and that we raised the floor of how much money would go into that from a $250,000 floor to a $500,000 floor. So that's the only piece of funding that we're saying must go there. The operators who get the small number of licenses, so the bill envisions between 2 and 6 potential licensees being able to operate in the state. The fees that those operators pay when they win a bid and get the license would pay for the operations. So those are the only 2 things we've set aside money for. I will say that this is not a big revenue moneymaker. The real reason to do this is to get what is a black market unregulated thing to be in the light of day and brought into the bounds where there's some consumer protection. The estimates that we have are that the total number of bets placed, less the winnings and the operating costs, would yield revenues in the single millions of dollars a year, growing into the small double-digit millions. So we're talking about, and depending on exactly how we set up the market, it's probably something like $10 million of revenue over 3 years. This is not going to, solve any of the major problems we're trying to address in other bills.
That's enough.
Hi, Troy Hedrick from Burlington. Can you talk a little bit about, I think New Jersey just recently, maybe even recently as last week, announced a program that they're launching that is going to track behavior of online bettors as they seek to try to maybe survey problem betting behavior. Can you talk a little bit about data from, and have you addressed any of that data that you would be collecting or the state would be collecting about the behavior of online bettors?
Yeah, so the responsible gaming plans that each of the operators would have to do in order to have a license to operate do address some of that. I don't know the specifics of the New Jersey plan, but they have to include things like algorithms that say you've been on the system so long, there has to be a pop-up that reminds you you've been on the system that long, or that you're approaching your self-imposed limit on how much you're going to bet. And so the operators collect that data and then have to report on the aggregated data to the Department of Liquor and Lottery under the responsible gaming plan. So those requirements are kind of built into the bill, but I'd be happy to look and talk to you about the specifics to see if there are things that we should, oh yes. So do you want to talk about the exclusion list?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's put in place in the bill language here, and is something that's operationally capable within the platforms, is a self-exclusion list. People can put a time period on that, or somebody with problem gambling addicted tendencies can actually say, I want to be banned forever. And what we are asking to do in this proposal is have the operators actually communicate within one another, which they have the capability of doing, do it in various capacities, that they all have the exclusion list that would be put together by the DLL in their system. So when people decide, you know what, this isn't for me, I should never touch this again, there is a permanent barrier put in place.
I have a question, Queen of the super basic question. So when you say that we would, that this is for online gaming only, and we would allow only a few licensed operators. So I just went on my phone. I don't know anything really about sports betting. So I just went on my phone. I found this app called FanDuel. Am I currently not allowed to, like, I'm afraid to press get. So is it currently illegal in Vermont for Vermonters to download and use those kinds of apps? So if I press this and download this app, that's currently not allowed. I'm trying to get a really basic grounding.
So you could absolutely download an app. So FanDuel, DraftKings, Caesars, a whole number of companies operate legal platforms in other states. Saying FanDuel is one of them, right? If you download that app in Vermont and then you set up an account, it will not allow you to actually place any bets. You'll be excluded because they have all of those legal operators in other states have what's called geofencing, where they can tell that you are in Vermont and that it is illegal in our state for them to accept bets from you. And you will not be able to place that bet until you get over a state border. And so the apps themselves with the legal operators already sort of fence you out. So you won't be allowed to do the illegal thing on a legitimate sports book that happens to be legal in another state if it's illegal in your state. The problem that we have right now is we can see that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Vermonters are just going over the border to place bets. That's one thing. And then potentially thousands, we have no way of knowing, but just based on what we can see with the attempts for people to place bets on the legal sports books in other states, is that it looks like a lot of those people are probably going on, from the testimony we've heard, offshore sites. You know, so if you think about, like, there's this legal market in other states that's regulated and has the geofencing. There are plenty of Vermonters placing bets online at illegal offshore sites with no consumer protection, no regulation that's saying they have to pay out, that they have to have the odds, you know, be reported in a way that's actually accurate and fair. And so bringing this thing that's already happening into the light is kind of that's the whole game that we're trying to wrestle with in the GovOps committee right now.
All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions, and we do have several other bills. So thank you to both Representative Byrong and Representative McCarthy for that. And if you have any questions, go to them. They want to hear from you. All right, up next, we're going to do, you all set? We're going to do Representative Chapin, who's going to do, I forget the number, but while you're walking up here, I will find it. It is H35, and it is Victim Assistance Program changes, right?
Hello, everyone. Ella Chapin of East Montpelier and of the Judiciary Committee. We are bringing to the floor tomorrow H35. This updates the statutes related to Vermont's Victims Assistance Program that's been around for a while. It's really updating it to reflect what's happening on the ground with the program currently. It moves the Victims Assistance Program from the Center for Crime Victim Services, which is a quasi-public entity set up in statute, but not a state agency, to the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. It updates the list of services that are provided under the program, and it changes the program name from Victims Assistance Program to the Victim Advocate Program. The reason for these changes is really that the Center for Crime Victim Services, which is a nonprofit quasi-public entity that receives a lot of federal funding and has received for many years. It was set up in 1991. Federal funding for a variety of different kinds of programs that benefit victims of crimes. One of those programs has been funding about 19 victim advocates that have been under the Center for Crime Victim Services, but have been embedded in the state's attorney's offices to work with victims in that regard. And the federal funding for those programs has dwindled significantly over the years. And it came to essentially a sort of a crisis point for that program. And last year, towards the end of the session, there was state money put into the budget for the first time to fund this program. And with that, it located that funding in the state agency, the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. So while those positions used to be overseen by the Center of Crime Victim Services with federal funding flowing through that organization to employees that were embedded with the state's attorneys, now the funding flows through the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs for those positions. Nothing has changed for the services and nothing has changed for the number of positions, but that change happening with the funding needs to be reflected in the statute. The Center for Crime Victim Services is in this awkward place of having some kind of authority over these positions that they don't hire or really have on their staff any longer. So this would clean up that issue. And the statutory list of services provided is a slight adjustments to sort of modernize that statute that hasn't been touched in a long time. Nothing really substantive in terms of the changes there. And it changes the program name to really reflect that this is more of an advocacy program and not just sort of basic assistance as it started out many years ago. I will leave it there and we'll be reporting on this tomorrow, and we are happy to have you ask us questions if you now, or feel free to pull over anyone on our committee at any time.
So any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Chapin. Again, go to her if you have any other questions or anybody on judiciary. Up next is Representative Wood, who's going to be talking about H-190, which are end-of-life modifications, end-of-life bill modifications.
Hi, Teresa Wood from Waterbury, Chair of the Human Services Committee. We have a bill being voted out of committee this afternoon, an act relating to removing the residency requirement from Vermont's patient choice at end of life laws. For folks who were here last biennium, we did make some changes to this statute, and we should have made this change at that time as well, but we didn't. And think about end of life care as healthcare. It is healthcare, and we don't have to ask permission or stay where we're from, or have a residency requirement if we decide to go to Dartmouth or the Mayo Center or Mass General or anything like that to get healthcare. And so this is modernizing the statute, something that we should have done last year, and we're removing the Vermont residency requirement for end of life choices here. So it's a pretty simple bill. It removes it in two parts of the bill, and other than that, that's the only change that we're looking at this year. So just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. If you have any questions, just let me know, or Representative Garofano is going to be reporting it on the floor this week later. Should be up on Thursday for a vote.
Thank you, Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury. Teresa, you say this is a simple bill, and it is a simple change. And for those of us who have supported this over the years, it does seem like a simple evolution. Do you anticipate that the people who do not view this as a simple bill will make this difficult for you and for the conversation on the floor?
I expect that this is not going to be a unanimous vote by any stretch of the imagination. There are people who oppose this on, their own personal grounds, and I expect that we may hear from them. And we may not. I'm not sure. Out of committee, it right now. I'm not going to jinx us, but it's looking like a very positive vote out of committee right now. So yes, it's possible we'll hear from people on the floor on Thursday about this, but like I said, it's an evolution of what frankly we should have done in thinking about end of life care as healthcare, and people are free to receive their health care wherever they choose to receive their health care. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wood. All right, and get a hold of them if it sounds like Representative Garofano is reporting that. Get a hold of them if you have any further questions or comments. Last up, we have H67, the Household Hazardous Waste Bill, and I have are you both coming? It's totally up to you who's coming up. I'll let you go.
Thank you. So H67 is, I believe, the fourth try at addressing how we deal with various household hazardous waste here in Vermont. We currently have 4 extended producer responsibility, or EPR, programs for the following household hazardous wastes: mercury thermostats and light bulbs, batteries, electronics, and then we also have a system to collect paint. But there are a lot of other household hazardous wastes. Think of your basement underneath your sink that we don't have a program for: furniture strippers, paint thinners, glues, adhesives, kerosene, pesticides, pool, hot tub chemicals, and others. I have like a whole page in case you're interested. Our current approach for those is people do bring them to our solid waste management entities, or SWMEs. And SWMEs have to have 2 events a year. A lot of them hold more, but right now SWMEs don't actually have a funding approach for this. Essentially what they do is take it, recycle what they can, dispose what they need to, and then your constituents and us pay for it directly through fees, taxes, disposal charges. This is costing more than 1.6 million a year. And on top of that, a lot of it isn't actually getting to the SWMEs, either because people don't know about it, or because, it's Sunday at 5 p.m. and you gotta empty the basement before you move out because it's the end of the month. And so we're seeing about 640 tons per year go into landfill. And the costs, of course, are going up and up and up. So the SWMEs and the Agency of Natural Resources banded together and said, what can we do about this? That is H67. What does it do? First, it requires a creation of a stewardship organization that is responsible for registering all the manufacturers, the products, the brands that are sold in Vermont. And then it requires the stewardship organization to develop a collection plan, which has to have free statewide collection services, convenient locations, public outreach and education, as well as performance goals. The stewardship organization also has to complete an annual report, and they have to undergo an audit every 5 years, and ANR provides oversight. And then second, all the manufacturers who actually want to sell their product in Vermont are required to be part of said stewardship organization or organizations, because there can be more than one potentially. So in sum, right now, taxpayers are paying for these household hazardous waste to be disposed of properly. It's getting more expensive, and a bunch of it's actually going into our landfills. They're toxic, dangerous, poisonous, reactive, flammable, corrosive. So basically, we really don't want this at Coventry. H67 follows in line with Vermont's other very successful extended producer responsibility programs for batteries, mercury products, and electronics. It basically works with the current SWME collection program, or at least that's the plan. Depends on how the businesses want to do it. It will improve diversion from landfills because of the public outreach and education requirements and performance goals. It will reduce financial costs for swimmies and your constituents. It will lessen environmental and public health risks, and it also places the burden of household hazardous waste management on the responsible party, which is really the manufacturer. And the cool part of that is that it can actually incentivize those manufacturers to maybe change some of their upstream processes in their manufacturing plants. So do they want to make a product that has slightly less strong, or not strong, but slightly less plastic in the container? So it basically incentivizes the activity for change where we want it. Come and see me if you have any questions, or anyone from the committee or our chair, and hopefully you'll decide to support, since this has both Agency of Natural Resources Administration as well as the swimmies in favor. Thanks.
Any questions? Thumbs up. Thank you, Representative Stebbins. Okay, that was it on my list. If no one else has anything else, we will call it a wrap. Have a great week, everyone.